I got the job at Mel's Diner 3 weeks after I moved out of my parents' house. It was a 24-hour place off Route 9 with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since 2003. The pay was terrible, but they were willing to hire someone with literally zero experience. My first closing shift was on a Wednesday in late September. It started awful and got worse within a few hours. A trucker left a 5-cent tip on a $40 check. A woman threw her plate at me because I brought her scrambled eggs instead of hash browns, even though I had repeated her order back to her twice. And 2 guys in a corner booth kept making kissing sounds every time I walked past. By 11, I was counting down the minutes until midnight. My feet hurt, my apron was stained with ketchup and coffee, and I had already cried once in the walk-in freezer. That's when this guy walked in. He was maybe 32, dressed in a button-down shirt and clean jeans. He smiled when he sat down at the counter and asked how my night was going, and actually listened when I said it had been rough. He ordered a coffee and pie and left a $20 tip on an $8 check, and told me I seemed to be doing a good job despite everything. After the night I'd had, that kindness felt like oxygen. We talked while I wiped down tables. He said his name was Danny. He worked in sales and traveled a lot. He was passing through on his way to Albany. Danny was cheesy in places, but he was easy to talk to. Around 11:40, he asked if I wanted to grab a drink after my shift, said there was a bar still open a few miles down the road, and that I looked like I could use one after the night I'd had. I hesitated. My mom drilled it into me never to go anywhere with strange men, but Danny didn't feel like a stranger anymore. In fact, I was so comfortable around him that we might have been friends for a while, and I didn't want to go back to my empty apartment alone, sitting and replaying every awful moment of the shift. So I said yes. Danny smiled and said he'd wait outside. He told me he was driving a silver BMW that'd be parked near the road. The last customer left at 11:55. I helped the night cook Carlos finish closing, grabbed my jacket, and clocked out at 12:15. The parking lot was dark. The overhead lights had been busted for weeks, and nobody had bothered to fix them. I could see a silver car idling near the edge of the lot with its headlights off. I walked toward it. I was maybe 30 feet away when I felt somebody tug at my jacket from behind. I spun around to this shady-looking guy in a dark hoodie, grinning down at me. He was short but bulky. Most of his face was ducked under the hoodie, but I could see the yellow crooked teeth followed by a piercing on the upper lip. My heart started pounding. He leered at me as he stepped closer, gripping my arm so tightly his fingers dug into my flesh. He told me to be quiet, that we were just going for a ride. I looked toward the BMW. Danny was standing outside the driver's door now, watching. I screamed at him to come and help me. He didn't move. His face was flat, expressionless. My brain caught up. This was all planned. Danny was being nice to me, so I'd trust him and follow him outside alone. I screamed and dropped straight down, letting my weight go completely dead. The man wasn't expecting it. He stumbled forward and lost his grip on my arm for just a second. Without giving him time to recover, I stomped down hard on his foot with my heel and dashed straight for the diner. I pounded and screamed at the glass door with both fists until Carlos looked up from where he was mopping and rushed to unlock it. I shoved past him and told him to lock it again and to call the police. Through the window, I could see the BMW. Both men had already gotten in. The car backed up slowly, turned toward the exit, and drove away. Carlos called 911. I sat on the floor behind the counter with my knees pulled up to my chest, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. 2 officers showed up 20 minutes later. They took my statement, checked the parking lot, and found nothing. One of them said the cameras outside hadn't worked in over a year. They asked what the man looked like. I realized I couldn't remember much except for an easy smile, brown hair, and an average-looking face. Danny looked so normal it was almost forgettable. Maybe that was the whole point. The officer said to keep an eye out, but without plates or a clear description, there wasn't much they could do. He asked if the man had said where he was from or where he was going. I remember him saying Albany, but then I wondered if anything he'd said was true. I quit the next day without even going back for my last paycheck. Carlos dropped it off at my apartment the following week. My mom wanted me to move back home. I told her I was fine, that it was just bad luck that I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. But I couldn't sleep in my apartment anymore. Every sound in the hallway makes me freeze. I got a new job a month later at a coffee shop that closed at 6. I only work day shifts now. I never walk to my car alone, even in broad daylight, and I don't talk to customers beyond what's necessary. I try to be super cautious now, but it doesn't stop me from thinking about that one time when I wasn't. My 16-year-old daughter, Anya, was on her way home from volleyball practice that Wednesday evening when a drunk driver ran a red light on her. The bystanders called the ER, but it was too late. She left a void in my heart and home that I couldn't fill no matter what. I had already lost my husband to cancer 4 years back, and there was nothing left for me in the city anymore. So I moved into the farmhouse 3 months after the funeral. It had been my aunt's before she passed and was left to me in her will. It sat on 12 acres with no neighbors for 2 miles. I set up Anya's things in the upstairs bedroom, still in boxes. I told myself I'd unpack her belongings eventually and turn her bedroom into a proper memorial, but I simply couldn't go in there without breaking down. My dog Cooper slept in my room most nights. He was a lab mix. Anya picked him out from the shelter when she was 10. About 6 weeks after I moved in, I noticed something odd. I was coming back from the grocery store around dusk when I looked up at the house and felt the curtain in Anya's window move slightly, as if someone had been standing there and ducked after seeing me. I stood in the driveway staring at it, telling myself it was the wind. Maybe I'd left a window open. But when I went inside and checked, all the windows were locked. That night, Cooper kept pacing the hallway outside my bedroom, stopping in front of Anya's closed door and growling low in his throat. I got up, put my ear against the door, and listened, but everything was exactly how it should be. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep much. Over the next 2 weeks, small things kept happening. I'd turn off the kitchen light before bed and find it on again in the morning. The television would be on a different channel than I left it. Once I found the back door unlocked, even though I was certain I'd bolted it. I called the sheriff. They came and searched the property, but didn't find anything. The officer said old houses settle, locks can be tricky, and I should consider getting an alarm system if I were worried. 3 nights later, I woke up to footsteps upstairs, moving from one side of Anya's room to the other. The floorboards creaked in a rhythm I recognized. Anya used to pace when she was stressed about a test or upset about something at school. I grabbed my phone and crept into the hallway. Cooper was already there, pressed against the wall, trembling. As I climbed the stairs slowly, the footsteps stopped, still with my heart hammering. I reached Anya's door and opened it. Inside, the room was destroyed. Anya's boxes had been opened, and clothes were scattered everywhere. Dresser drawers were pulled out with contents dumped on the floor. The volleyball was gone from the windowsill too, and crouched beside the bed, wearing one of Anya's dresses, was a child-sized figure. For a second, my heart stopped beating. I was frozen as the figure slowly looked up, darted forward, and ran right past me. So close I felt the air move. I stood there shaking for I don't know how long before I could make my legs work. I went downstairs, turned on every light, called the sheriff, and sat in the kitchen with a knife until the cops arrived. They searched the whole house top to bottom, but couldn't find anything out of place. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. On the 4th night, I woke up to Cooper barking. I got up and found him in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs, staring upward toward Anya's room. The same small figure wearing Anya's volleyball uniform was standing in the doorway. The shorts were too big, bunched up, and held with a belt. The jersey hung past the knees. I found my voice and asked who she was, asked why she was wearing Anya's clothes. The figure took a step forward into the light from the hallway. My stomach turned. It wasn't a child. The body was small, maybe 4.5 feet tall, but the face was wrong. It was deeply lined and weathered, basically an adult face on a child-sized body. Her eyes were sunken and dark, and her mouth stretched into a thin line. She giggled, saying she wore them because the clothes fit her just fine. She said she'd been waiting for someone to bring her new things. I screamed. Cooper bolted for the front door, and I followed without stopping to grab my phone or keys or anything. I ran barefoot down the driveway in my pajamas. I made it to my car and locked the doors, sitting there shaking and watching the house. The police came again. This time, they brought machines and dogs, and found a crawlspace access panel in Anya's closet that no one had ever noticed before. Behind it was a 3-foot-high space, running the length of the upstairs. Inside, they found blankets, food wrappers, and empty water bottles. Anya's volleyball was there too, along with a collection of her clothes neatly folded in the corner. The woman had been living up there for weeks, maybe longer than that. They searched the woods for hours, checked abandoned buildings, and talked to neighbors miles away. But nobody had ever seen her. I moved out that same day, stayed in a motel while my brother helped me pack everything. I sold the farmhouse within a year for half of what it was worth. Anya's things are in storage now. I can't bring myself to go through them without thinking about that woman wearing her clothes, sleeping in that crawl space right above where I thought I was keeping Anya's memory safe. Last week, I got a call from the new owners of the farmhouse. They wanted to know if I left any of my daughter's things behind. I told them I'd taken everything. They said they'd found a volleyball in the woods behind the house. Asked if I wanted it back. I was 31 and working nights at a truck stop diner off Interstate 84. It wasn't a career, but I needed the job to survive. Jaden's dad had left when he was 2, and the child support check stopped coming 6 months later. The diner paid enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. It was a Tuesday in March, and I'd only had 3 tables all evening when 2 drunk oddballs stumbled in around 9. They looked to be in their 40s, had their work boots on, paired with flannel shirts. They were loud from the moment they sat down, but it wasn't the first time we were dealing with nuts. I brought them menus and water. One of them asked if I came with the meal. The other thought it was hilarious. I kept my face neutral and asked what they wanted to drink. The first one leaned back in the booth and looked me up and down slowly. He said he'd take whatever I was offering. I told them I'd give them a minute to look at the menu. Over the next 20 minutes, it got worse. Every time I walked past, one of them made nasty comments. They asked if I was single, made remarks about my body, and even blocked my path when I tried to leave their table. I kept smiling, stayed polite, and reminded myself how much I needed the job and tips for Jaden, until one of them grabbed my wrist. I was reaching across to refill the water when his hand shot out and wrapped around my arm. He pulled me closer and said I should sit down and have a drink with them. He started blabbering about things he'd do to me. I tried to yank my hand back, but he wouldn't let go. The other guy kept laughing. Tears welled up in my eyes. I was pissed and desperate. Without thinking twice, I raised my hand and slapped him hard. The sound echoed through the whole diner, and both of them went quiet. The one I'd slapped stared at me with his mouth half open as his cheek turned red. My manager, Frank, came yelling out of the kitchen. He'd seen the whole thing through the service window and threatened to call the cops if they didn't leave immediately. They walked out slowly, still looking at me. The one I'd slapped said I'd regret that. His friend laughed and said something I couldn't quite hear. Frank walked them to the door and watched them get into a pickup truck. He came back and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, that I just wanted to finish my shift. The rest of the night passed without incident. We closed at 11. I clocked out, grabbed my purse, and walked to the parking lot to find all 4 tires on my Honda were slashed. Unfortunately, Frank had already left, so the diner was locked, and my phone showed only 8% battery. I called a tow truck. They said they can't make it for 2 hours. I asked for a cab. The dispatcher said they could send one, but it would take at least 40 minutes. I couldn't wait in the parking lot that long with only 8% battery and no lights in sight except the one flickering pole lamp by the dumpster. So I started walking towards the gas station a quarter mile down the access road. I made it maybe 300 yards when headlights slowed behind me as a pickup truck pulled onto the shoulder. And then the 2 oddballs from earlier got out. Without wasting a second, I bolted. I cut across the drainage ditch, right into the woods behind the truck stop. Branches whipped against my face, but I didn't stop. I could hear them behind me. One of them was yelling my name. The other one was laughing. Suddenly, my foot caught on something, a root or a rock, and I went down hard. My knee slammed into the ground and pain shot up my leg. I tried to stand and couldn't. My ankle rolled under me, and I fell again. When I put weight on my left leg, it buckled. Something was broken or badly sprained. I crawled forward on my hands and knees and pulled myself deeper into the woods. My phone had fallen somewhere behind me. I could see the glow of the flashlight they were using, sweeping back and forth between the trees. Luckily, I found a fallen log and wedged myself behind it. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep quiet. My breath was coming in short gasps I couldn't control. The flashlight beam passed over the log and kept moving. They were maybe 20 feet away. I could hear them talking to each other, arguing about which direction I'd gone. One of them said I couldn't have gotten far. I stayed completely still. My leg was throbbing. I could feel something warm running down my shin, probably blood from where I'd hit the ground. They searched for what felt like hours. Their voices got farther away before they'd be closer again. At one point, one of them stood so close to the log I could smell cigarette smoke. Eventually, their voices faded. I heard a truck door slam in the distance and the engine humming away. I still waited another 30 minutes before I pulled myself upright using the log and started limping back toward the road. I found my phone in the dirt. The screen was cracked, but it was still working. It still had 2% battery. I called 911 and whispered my location. The dispatcher kept me on the line until the ambulance arrived. They found me sitting against a tree about 50 yards from the truck stop, covered in mud and blood. My leg was fractured in 2 places. They kept me in the hospital overnight for observation. The police took my statement the next morning. I gave them descriptions and told them about the truck. They said they'd look into it, but without plates, there wasn't much they could do. I quit the diner the day I got out of the hospital, told Frank over the phone. He said he understood and that he was sorry. One of my friends helped me get a remote job 3 weeks later at a call center. So I work from home now and avoid going after dark anymore. Jaden is only 5, but way more mature than kids his age. Maybe he couldn't get the whole story, but he knows his mommy survived something horrible. Over time, he may forget it, but I know I won't. I bought the house in May, right after I got the promotion at work. It was a small 2-bedroom in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone minded their own business. The price was reasonable. The inspection came back clean, and I could finally afford to live alone. The neighbor to my right, Mr. Henry, seemed normal enough at first. I saw him once during the walkthrough. He was an older man in his 50s working in his garden. He waved and I waved back. I moved in on a Saturday and spent the weekend unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. Sunday evening, I was carrying the last load in from my car when I noticed him standing at his upstairs window, looking down at me. I figured he was just curious about the new neighbor. But over the next week, I started noticing a pattern. Every time I came home from work, he'd be at that same window, standing still as a statue, peering down at me. I mentioned it to my coworker, Diane. She said old people get bored and that he probably didn't mean anything by it. I tried to believe that. 3 weeks in, I was taking a shower before bed. It was around 10:30, and I had the bathroom window cracked to let out the steam. The window was frosted glass, high enough that nobody could see in unless they were standing on something. I was rinsing shampoo out of my hair when I saw a bright flash of light through the frosted glass. I froze for a second before I turned off the water and wrapped a towel around myself. My hands were shaking. I killed the bathroom light and stood in the dark, trying to listen over the sound of my heartbeat. I could hear shuffling outside before hurried footsteps seemed to move away toward the fence line. I went to my bedroom window that faced his yard. In the dim light from his porch, I saw a shadow moving back toward his house. I didn't sleep that night, kept every light on and checked the locks on all the windows and doors at least a dozen times. The next morning, I called the police and told them what happened. They sent an officer out who took a report and said they talked to my neighbor. But without proof, it was difficult to do anything. He suggested I install curtains in all my windows and maybe get some motion sensor lights. I did both that same day, but it didn't stop. My dog Bailey started acting strange. She was a golden retriever and friendly with everyone, but she started barking at my bedroom window every night around midnight. She was pretty aggressive in a way I'd never seen before. One night, I looked out and saw fresh cigarette butts by my back fence. I don't smoke, nor do any of my friends who visited. The realization that someone could be lurking around my house made me paranoid. I started closing all my curtains before it got dark, stopped going outside after sunset, and toggled with my routine so I wasn't coming home at the same time every day. That Tuesday night, I'd gone to bed around 11. Bailey was on the floor beside me, already asleep. I was just starting to drift off when she bolted upright and started barking at the window. I sat up and listened. The house was quiet except for Bailey. I was about to tell her to settle down when I heard the sound of my bedroom window sliding open. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The window was open about 6 inches. As I watched, a hand reached through the gap and pushed it higher. Suddenly, his face flashed me a grin as he started pulling himself through. I screamed, grabbed the lamp from my nightstand, and swung it as hard as I could. It connected with the side of his head. Mr. Henry made a sound between a grunt and a gasp and fell backward. His body hung there for a second before he pulled himself free and dropped to the ground outside. I heard him running. Bailey was going insane, barking and throwing herself at the window. I called 911, told them my neighbor had tried to break into my house. They arrived in less than 5 minutes. When they went to his house, Mr. Henry answered the door like nothing had happened, claimed he'd been asleep the whole time. But I could see the blood on his temple where the lamp had hit him. The officers asked if they could search his house. He refused at first. Then his lawyer showed up and advised him to cooperate. They found 100 of my photos in his bedroom closet. Some of them were taken while I was showering or changing. He drilled a tiny hole in my fence and installed a small camera pointing at my back door. They found 2 more cameras in the bushes near my house. He was arrested that night. The trial took 8 months. His lawyer tried to argue he was just a lonely old man who developed an inappropriate fixation. The prosecutor showed the jury photos, the cameras, and the evidence of him tampering with my window lock. He got 4 years. I sold the house before he was even sentenced. Couldn't stay there another night. I live in an apartment now, on the 3rd floor, facing an open parking lot where I can see anyone approaching. I still check all my locks 3 times before bed and close every curtain the second the sun goes down. I lost Bailey last year to heart failure. Sometimes I look up his name online just to make sure he's not living near me. The registry shows an address 40 miles away, but I don't trust it. I think about those photos a lot. The ones they showed in court were just a fraction of what they found. The detective told me there were over 1,000 images. He'd been watching me from the moment I moved in, and I wonder how long he'd been planning to climb through that window. If that was the first time he tried, or just the first time someone had woken up. I was 17 when I started working at Crossroads Diner. It sat on Highway 81 in the middle of nowhere upstate. My shift was 5 to midnight on weekends, which meant I was usually alone up front while Hector worked in the kitchen. It was a Thursday in November when the man walked in around 9:30, right after the dinner rush had died down. He was thin, maybe mid-40s, and wore khakis and a plain blue sweater. His hair was neatly combed. He looked like a substitute teacher or an accountant at best. He settled in booth 7, the last one near the bathrooms, and ordered 2 bottles of water. I brought it to him with silverware wrapped in a paper napkin. He thanked me and pulled out a small notebook with graph paper inside. He started writing numbers in neat columns. By then, I'd encountered plenty of weirdos, so I simply went back to work but kept an eye on him. An hour passed, but instead of ordering food, he sat there, writing and occasionally sipping his water. Every few minutes, he'd glance up at me and would immediately look away the moment our eyes met. Around 10:30, I went over and asked if he wanted to order anything. He looked up with a small smile and said he was fine. He took a pause before he added my name. I froze. My name tag had fallen off 2 days ago, and I hadn't gotten a replacement yet, and didn't remember introducing myself. He must have seen the confusion on my face because he gestured toward the schedule board near the kitchen, said he noticed it earlier. That made sense. The board listed everyone's shifts with their first names. I relaxed a little and told him to let me know if he needed anything. He nodded and went back to his notebook. By 11:30, I started cleaning up for closing. The man was still there, scribbling stuff. I wiped down the other booths and refilled napkin dispensers, trying to work my way toward him without being obvious about it. He finally stood up around 11:45 and asked where the bathroom was. I pointed down the hall. He walked back there and I heard the door close. 10 minutes passed, but he didn't show up. I glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. Hector was finishing in the kitchen, and I wanted to lock up and get out. I walked down the hallway and knocked on the bathroom door, calling out to ask if everything was okay, but the stalls might have been empty. I knocked harder, but again, got no answer. I tried the handle. The door opened, and the bathroom was really empty. I looked around and noticed the window above the toilet was unlatched, pushed open wide enough for a thin person to squeeze through. The screen was gone. I backed out of the bathroom, visibly shaken. My heartbeats picked up. I went to tell Hector, but he'd already left through the kitchen entrance. I was alone. I locked the front door, turned off most of the lights, and went back to the office to grab my jacket. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. You should lock the back door first. That's where they usually come in. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen and read it again as another text came through. You took 4 minutes and 23 seconds to close last Tuesday. Tonight you were faster. I ran to the back door. It was still unlocked. Exactly how Hector had left it when he went to his car. I slammed the deadbolt and backed away from it. My phone buzzed again. Good. I looked out the kitchen window toward the parking lot. Headlights flicked on across the highway, but maybe 200 yards away, a dark sedan was parked on the shoulder with the engine running. The man was standing beside it with his notebook in his hand. He was looking directly at the diner. He raised his hand slowly, held up 3 fingers, and pointed at me. I dropped below the window and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to explain what was happening. She said officers were on the way, that I should stay inside and keep the doors locked. I stayed on the floor behind the counter, watching the front door. Every few seconds, I'd peek up at the window. The headlights were still there. 2 patrol cars pulled in some 15 minutes later. I watched the officers get out and look around. One of them crossed the highway toward where the sedan had been parked, but it was gone. I don't know when he left. I'd stopped looking after the 5th minute, too afraid he'd somehow gotten closer. The officers came inside and took my statement. I showed them the text. One of them asked if I noticed anyone suspicious before tonight. I said no. He asked if I was sure and insisted that I really think about it. I did. I remembered how last week, maybe the week before, I'd seen someone sitting in booth 7 late at night. I couldn't remember their face, but I remember thinking it was weird they'd only ordered water. The officer asked if I had security footage. I told him the cameras hadn't worked in months, that the owner kept saying he'd fix them but never did. They stayed until my mom came to pick me up, told me to call if anything else happened. I quit the next day, told my mom I wanted to focus on school. She didn't argue. 2 weeks after that, I was at the grocery store with friends when I saw him in the cereal aisle, wearing the same blue sweater, holding a box of cornflakes. When he saw me looking, he smiled and gave me a little wave. I left my cart and walked straight out. My friends asked what was wrong. I told them I'd seen someone I used to know. That night I got another text. You're faster at the grocery store too. 11 minutes from entrance to exit. Last time was 19. Efficient as ever, Noah. I was 12 when we moved into the house on Palm Street. My parents got it cheap at an auction, and we were excited about the deal until the realtor mentioned why the price was so low. The previous owner, Carlos, had been found dead in the attic where he'd apparently been hiding to escape his attackers. The police report claimed it to be a home invasion gone wrong, but they never caught the real culprits. My mom wanted to back out immediately, but Dad said a good deal was a good deal regardless. We moved in on a Sunday in August. I picked the bedroom on the second floor. It was directly beneath the attic access and was the biggest room in the house, with windows on 2 walls and enough space for my desk and bookshelves. The attic entrance was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling just outside my door. The first week was normal. I set up my room, started at the new school, and tried to make friends. The house was old and creaky, but that didn't bother me until the footsteps started, moving back and forth above my ceiling. I'd hear them at night, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. At first I thought it was my parents up there, but when I asked them about it the next morning, they seemed pretty much clueless. My dad went up to check but found nothing except for some old insulation and boxes that the previous owner had left behind. He reassured me that it was probably just the house settling, or animals in the walls, but the footsteps didn't sound like settling. On the 4th night, I noticed a chemical smell like fireworks coming with the footsteps. It would drift down through the ceiling and fill my room until I had to open a window. I mentioned it to my parents again. My dad said old houses had weird smells, that it was probably just dust or mildew. He checked the attic again when he had time. 2 weeks in, I decided to handle it myself. I was tired of being scared and lying awake. I figured if it was an animal, I could scare it off. And if it were something else, at least I'd know. That night, I stayed awake with my door cracked open, waiting for the sound or smell. Right at 2:15 in the morning, the movement started. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight and pulled down the attic ladder as quietly as I could. The smell nearly knocked me out. It was so strong I had to cover my nose with my shirt. I climbed the ladder slowly. My palms were sweating, and my heart was pounding. The attic was dark except the light from my phone. I could see exposed beams, pink insulation, and cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. The footsteps had stopped. Instead, a wet choking filled the space. It was coming from the far corner, past the boxes. I moved the light toward the sound, but could hardly see anything except dust floating and some shadows. Suddenly, I noticed legs lying on the floor in the corner, half hidden behind a support beam. As I crept closer, I could see a torso and an arm stretched out. My phone light shook in my hand. The man was on his back, wearing a white shirt that was dark and wet across the chest. His mouth was open. Blood was trickling from the corner. running down their neck and pulling on the wooden floor. Their eyes were open, and they were staring directly at me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Just then, they blinked. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. The figure on the floor made that choking sound again. Their chests heaved like they were trying to breathe. I watched in horror as their fingers twitched against the wood. Their mouths stretched into a sick smile, and blood bubbled between their teeth. I screamed and ran for the ladder, fell down the last 3 rungs, and hit the hallway floor hard. My dad's bedroom door flew open, and he came running out asking what was wrong. I pointed up at the attic, trying to get words out. Told him there was someone up there and they were dying. My dad climbed up with his own flashlight. I heard him moving around up there, opening boxes and checking behind the beams. He came back down 5 minutes later, said the attic was empty. I insisted I'd seen someone, described exactly where they'd been lying, what they looked like. My dad said I'd had a nightmare, that I'd probably been sleepwalking, and told me to go back to bed. The next morning, I asked the kid next door about the house. He was a few years older than me and had lived on the street his whole life. He said Carlos had been running some kind of illegal operation out of the attic. When it went bad, he tried to hide up there. The people who came for him found him anyway. They shot him 7 times in the chest and left him there to bleed out. It took 3 days before anyone found the body. I asked if they ever caught who did it. He said the case went cold after a few months. That night, the footsteps started again. But this time, I didn't go up to check. I put headphones in and turned my music up loud enough to drown them out. I didn't go near the attic after that. I didn't even like walking past the ladder in the hallway, because sometimes, late at night, I could still smell the gunpowder seeping through the ceiling. And sometimes, I heard that wet choking sound mixed in with the footsteps. The moment I turned 18, I moved out of the house. I told my parents I wanted to be closer to college, even though I'm only going to community school 20 minutes away. My parents still live in that house. They think I'm being dramatic, but I know what I saw up there. And it isn't an animal or the house settling. It's Carlos, dying the same painful death every single night. I never thought a gaming lobby could change my life, but that's exactly where it started, and where I almost lost everything. My name is Addie. I'm 26 years old. I work from home, and I spend most of my evenings playing an open-world survival game. It's the kind of game where the world is brutal and unforgiving, and surviving alone is nearly impossible. You need allies. You need someone watching your back. About 6 weeks ago, I found mine, or so I thought. His username was Echo. He appeared in my server one evening, offering to help me clear a particularly brutal area I'd been stuck on for days. He knew exactly what he was doing. Patient, tactical, funny in the dry, understated way I appreciate. Within a week, we were logging on together every night. He remembered details I mentioned offhand, that I preferred stealth builds, that I hated the swamp biome, that I always named my in-game horses after jazz musicians. It felt like genuine friendship, the kind that doesn't come along often. We eventually migrated to Discord, which felt like a natural step. Voice calls, then video calls. He never showed his face, always claiming his camera was broken, but his voice was warm and easy to listen to. I didn't question it. I trusted him. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony as the sun went down, painting everything amber and rose. It was genuinely beautiful, the kind of sunset that feels unfair to keep to yourself. I snapped a photo and sent it to Echo without thinking. Just a pretty view, I told him. He said it looked peaceful. I forgot about it almost immediately. 2 days later, I got a message from him. No greeting, no preamble. The pizza place on the corner of 4th and Main is having a sale. You should go. I read it twice, then a third time. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical, like the floor had tilted beneath my feet. I had never told Echo what city I lived in. I had never mentioned my street, my neighborhood, or anything about my surroundings. But that photo, the one I'd sent without a second thought, still had its metadata intact. GPS coordinates embedded invisibly in the image file, broadcasting my exact location to anyone who knew how to look. He had known where I lived for 2 days and said nothing. I blocked him on every platform, deleted my Discord account, and sat in my bathroom with the lights off for 20 minutes trying to slow my heartbeat. I told myself it was over. I told myself I had caught it in time. I was wrong. That night, around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a notification from a food delivery app I hadn't opened in weeks. Your order is outside. I hadn't placed an order. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. A delivery driver stood on my porch, a large bag in his hands, completely unsuspecting. But behind him, idling at the curb with its headlights off, was a dark SUV just sitting there, waiting. I didn't open the door. I watched the driver set the bag down and leave. The SUV didn't move. Then my phone buzzed again. An unknown number this time. You forgot to say thank you, Addie. I even got the extra dipping sauce you like. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called 911 and was talking to the dispatcher when the SUV's door finally swung open. A man stepped out onto the pavement. He wasn't rushing. He moved with the calm, deliberate patience of someone who had planned this carefully and was entirely unbothered by what he was doing. He was carrying a heavy roll of industrial plastic sheeting in one hand and a gym bag in the other. He didn't come to the front door. He turned and walked along the side of the house, directly toward the window of my home office. I ran. I made it to that room just as he reached the window. He looked straight at me through the glass, and he didn't flinch. He didn't run. He held up his phone so I could see the screen clearly. A real-time location tracker. A small blue dot pulsing steadily. Weeks earlier, he had sent me what he described as a gift, a custom game file he'd made for me. I had opened it without hesitation. Somewhere buried inside it was a tracking script that had been reporting my location ever since. He knew where I was in my house. He had probably known for days. I heard sirens before he got the window screen fully removed. He was still working on the window frame when 2 patrol cars came around the corner. He was arrested on my side lawn, gym bag at his feet. The police told me afterward what they found inside that bag. Zip ties, a syringe loaded with a sedative, and a printed document. Every message we had ever exchanged, going back to the very first night in the gaming lobby, with my full home address handwritten at the top and highlighted in yellow. He had driven across 3 states to get to me. He had spent weeks building my trust, learning my habits, mapping my routines. The friendship wasn't real. It was architecture. Every joke, every in-game assist, every late-night conversation was a brick in a structure designed for one purpose. I still play sometimes. I still love the game. But I strip the metadata from every photo I take. I never open unsolicited files, and I keep my location services off by default. I don't tell people my name anymore either. Not the real one. I'm a 20-year-old female, but at the time I was 18. I had been working at this well-known bakery for about 3 years and never experienced anything like this. I had heard scary stories from people who worked at different locations, but I never expected anything would happen at my store. At the time, I was normally working the early morning shift, but this day I swapped shifts with someone who closed. I closed a lot while in high school, so this was nothing new for me. I was working with 2 other people. Sarah, who was my age, and Karen, who was around 50. It was a pretty slow night. and we decided to start our closing tasks early so we didn't have to stay longer than necessary. Back then, we closed at midnight on the weekends, but corporate changed to 10 p.m. not long after this night. We finished most of our tasks by 11:15 p.m., but had to wait until we were fully closed to finish the last two. Sarah, Karen, and I were chatting about a new restaurant that we all wanted to try when I noticed this older man outside her store. Something about him immediately felt off. He had a big backpack on, a long scraggly beard, and messy hair. He was dirty, and his clothes were stained and full of rips. He was farther away from the store, but I could tell he was watching us. The front of the bakery was all windows, so he could clearly see everything inside. He soon walked away, and I didn't think much of it. We continued chatting. About 5 minutes later, we heard the door open. I saw the man walk inside her store holding his backpack and a giant bag of popcorn. I'm not exaggerating when I say it looked like one of those oversized carnival bags. It was out of place enough that it immediately caught my attention. There weren't any stores nearby that sold anything like that, and I was pretty sure he didn't have it when I saw him outside earlier. The three of us looked at each other, silently trying to decide who would help him. I finally stepped up to the register and asked what I could get him. He said he wanted a cookie but didn't have any money. I felt bad for him, especially with the condition he was in. I personally think everyone deserves a small treat, whether they have money or not. Since we had extras that would most likely be thrown out, I gave him 2 for free. He seemed very grateful and then offered me some of his popcorn. At first I thought it was just a kind gesture, trying to return the favor. I smiled and said, "That's very sweet of you, but no thank you." He seemed almost surprised that I declined, and kept insisting, "Oh, just have some popcorn." I kept declining as nicely as I could, trying not to make him more upset. He kept asking if I was sure in a way that felt more pushy than friendly. Eventually he left, and once the doors closed, all 3 of us agreed the interaction felt off. Not long after, Karen finished her shift and started packing up. Before she left, she told us to lock the door, leave the trash, which was a nightly task for morning crew, and walk out to our cars together. "Something just feels off," she said. We all agreed. I locked the door after she left, and thankfully, we didn't have any more customers the rest of the night, so I didn't have to open the door again and possibly let the man back in. I went into the back to finish a couple of dishes while Sarah mopped up front. A few minutes later, Sarah came into the back looking very panicked. I took out my earbuds, and that's when I heard it. Loud banging and yelling. She said the man was back and trying to get inside. He was very angry, shouting that he had left his backpack in the store and we had taken it. I knew for a fact we hadn't. I peeked my head around the corner and we locked eyes through the glass. That seemed to make him even more upset. The yelling and banging became louder, and he was violently yanking and slamming the door, shaking the glass, like he was trying to rip it open. My heart started racing. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but right before I hit call, everything went quiet. Absolutely silent. No shouting, no banging, nothing. Sarah and I froze. We listened carefully. Then we heard the door start to unlock, then open and close. I remember panicking and thinking, did he break the lockbox outside and get the key? We didn't know what to do. Running and hiding seemed like the obvious choice, but fear had our feet glued to the ground. Then we heard Karen yelling at the front of the store, asking if we were okay. We came out from the back and saw Karen, but no man. I felt immediate relief. She told us she had driven 10 minutes out, but had a gut feeling to turn around. When she came back, she saw the man at the door, got out of her car, and told him to leave or she would call the police. He ran immediately. We never called the police and never saw him again. I'm so grateful Karen came back. With how violently he was trying to open the door, I'm sure he wasn't too far from getting in. What freaked me out the most is his backpack was never in the store. In fact, I'm pretty sure I saw it outside when I peeked my head around the corner earlier. I don't know if he was confused, on something, or had worse intentions, but I'm grateful Sarah and I didn't have to find that out. After that, our manager always made sure to have a male employee on closing shifts. I'm almost 21 now, and just quit from that bakery, and thankfully nothing like that has happened again. Just one scary incident in the 5 years I worked there. I'll never ignore gut feelings, mine or someone else's. They're almost never wrong. My name's JD, and this is something that stuck with me since I was 13. I grew up in a quiet town in Trinidad. It wasn't the kind of place where anything serious really happened. Most nights were calm, and people mostly kept to themselves. Looking back, that's probably why this felt so out of place. I wasn't a popular kid. I kept to myself, didn't have many friends, and spent most of my time at home. That's just how things were for me. The first time something strange happened was on a school night in May. I had just come home from school, and I was sitting in the living room with my dad watching TV. My mom was asleep in the bedroom, and my siblings weren't home yet. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud thud on the roof. It didn't sound like something small. It sounded heavy, like something had landed up there. My dad and I both looked up at the same time. Then, almost immediately after, the cross we had hanging on the wall fell to the ground, and the power went out. The entire house went dark in seconds. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then my dad quietly muttered, "What the hell?" I remember feeling uneasy right away. It wasn't just the blackout. We'd had those before. But the timing didn't make sense. The thud, the cross falling, and the power cutting out all happened within seconds of each other. My dad told me not to worry and said it was probably just a power outage, but he didn't sound convinced. By the time my siblings got home, it was already getting dark. My parents realized we didn't have enough candles, so my 2 older sisters and I went to a nearby shop to buy some. The shop wasn't far, but when we got there, my sisters ran into friends and started talking. I kept telling them we should go, but they brushed me off. What should have taken 15 minutes turned into almost 2 hours. By the time we started walking back, it was dark, around 7. Most of the street lights weren't working because of the outage, and the road felt a lot quieter than usual. On the way home, I told my sisters I needed to pee, so I stepped off near some bushes. At first, everything felt normal. Then I got that feeling, that sudden, heavy awareness that someone or something was watching me. I stopped and stared into the bushes. I couldn't see anything clearly, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like something was standing just out of sight, completely still, just watching. My sisters called my name from the road. "JD, hurry up. Mom and Dad are waiting." That snapped me out of it. I rushed back to them and didn't say anything. I knew they wouldn't take me seriously. When we got home, we lit the candles and settled in. Eventually, everyone went to bed. Everyone except me. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that feeling in the bushes. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured something standing there in the dark. At some point, one of my sisters woke up. The candle in her room had burned out, and everything was pitch black again. She started calling for my mom. "Mommy?" No response. She said it again, louder. "Mommy?" Then, from outside the window, something answered. "Mommy." I sat up instantly. My sister froze. The voice didn't sound right. It didn't sound human. It sounded like something trying to copy the word, but not understanding how it should actually sound. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then it said it again. "Mommy." Same voice, same tone. My chest felt tight, and the air in the room felt heavy. I looked at my sister and she was already staring at me. That was when I knew I hadn't imagined it. Before anything else could happen, my older brother woke up and got annoyed that we were making noise. We told him something was outside, but he just told us to stop and go to sleep. He didn't hear it, but we did. The next morning, everything went back to normal. The power was back, the cross was hung up again, and no one talked about it. But I never forgot that voice. 5 years passed. By the time I was 18, life had changed a lot. My mom had passed away. I had just gone through a breakup, and I spent most of my time alone at home. One night, I came back after hanging out with one of the few friends I had left. The house felt empty. I ate, took a shower, and went to my room. As I started making my bed, I felt it again. That same feeling, like something was watching me. I froze. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just stressed, that it was all in my head. Then I turned around. There was something outside my window. It was close to the glass, just enough for me to see its face clearly. Its skin was pale, almost gray. It had no hair. Its eyes were wide and white, like there were no pupils. And it was smiling, the kind of smile that didn't look human, too wide, too forced. I couldn't move. It knew I saw it. The smile stretched even wider. Then it spoke. Mommy. The same voice, exactly the same as the night when I was 13. That's when I lost it. I screamed, then ran out of the house without thinking. I didn't even stop to grab anything. I just ran straight to a neighbor's house, shaking. When I told them what happened, they didn't believe me. They thought I imagined it or had some kind of panic attack. They let me stay the night, but I didn't sleep. The next day I told my dad, but he didn't believe me either. But when I told my sister, the same one who heard the voice with me years ago, her reaction was different. She looked at me and said, "You saw it too?" That made my stomach drop. Then she told me something she had never mentioned before. About a month earlier, she had been home with her boyfriend. He was asleep, and she went to the bathroom. While she was in there, she heard a tapping on the window. She looked over, and there was something standing outside. Same pale face, same blank eyes, same smile. And then it said one word. Mommy. She screamed and her boyfriend woke up, but by the time he checked, it was gone. That was when it really hit me. This thing wasn't just something I imagined as a kid. It had been there. It had come back. Or maybe it never left. I don't know what landed on our roof that night. I don't know why the cross fell, or why the power went out at that exact moment. And I definitely don't know what that thing is. But I know what I saw. And I know my sister saw it too. Even now, I hate looking out windows at night. Especially when the room is dark and the glass turns into a reflection. Because sometimes, when I catch my reflection just right, it almost feels like I'm not the only one looking back. My name's Donovan, and this is something that stuck with me for most of my life. I grew up in Denver, in a part of the city that wasn't exactly safe. I was around 7 or 8 at the time, the oldest of 5 kids, and we lived in a small apartment complex where something was always happening. Fights, screaming, police showing up almost every night. It was just normal to us. My dad worked long shifts, usually from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m., so most nights it was just my mom trying to keep everything together. She always told us things were fine, that we were safe. But even at that age, I knew she didn't fully believe that. There was one night that felt different. I remember it clearly because of how quiet it was. No yelling, no sirens, nothing. Even my mom noticed it. We were just sitting there watching TV, almost enjoying the silence for once. Then, out of nowhere, a scream cut through the complex. It was so loud and sudden. It felt like it came from right outside our window. The kind of scream you don't forget. My siblings immediately started crying. I just froze. My mom rushed to the window, trying to see what was going on, but she couldn't see anything from our angle. Within seconds, more noise followed. People yelling, shouting for help. Someone screaming to call 911. It all seemed to be coming from the far side of the building. Within minutes, police, ambulances, and fire trucks flooded the area. My mom told us to stay inside and lock the door while she went to check what happened. I stayed with my siblings, trying to calm them down, but I couldn't shake that scream out of my head. When my mom came back, she looked completely shaken, pale, quiet, like she'd just seen something she didn't want to process. I kept asking her what happened, but she wouldn't tell me. She just said it wasn't something I needed to hear, then called my dad and told him to come home immediately. When he got back, he had the same look on his face. Later, I overheard him telling my mom what he saw. A man had been pushed out of a top-floor window. There was broken glass everywhere, and his body was lying below, covered with a sheet. That scream we heard was him. For a long time after that, I couldn't get it out of my head. A few days later, we walked past the area where it happened. There was still dried blood on the ground. I remember looking up and seeing the boarded up window above. It didn't feel real, but at the same time, it felt way too real. Things settled down for a while after that. At least, that's what we thought. A few months later, there was another night that felt off in the same way. Too quiet. We were inside again, watching TV. My dad was at work, and my mom kept saying she had a bad feeling. I didn't say anything, but I felt it too. Then we heard voices right outside our apartment door. At first, it sounded like an argument. A couple of guys going back and forth, getting louder, more aggressive. Some of the neighbors even shouted at them to take it somewhere else. But they didn't. Within seconds, it turned physical. You could hear shoving, hitting, things being knocked around. I made the mistake of stepping closer to the door to listen. My mom immediately told me to get back. And right after she said that, one of the guys started screaming. Not yelling, screaming. It was raw panic, pain, the kind of sound that hits you instantly. I ran straight back to my mom crying, and my siblings followed. The screaming didn't stop. We could hear him stumbling down the hallway, banging on doors, begging for help. At one point, he even hit our door. My mom shouted through it that the police were coming. By the time emergency services arrived, everything went quiet again. A few days later, a detective came by and spoke to my mom. He told her it was a drug deal that went bad. 2 men had been stabbed. One survived. The other didn't make it. That was the moment my mom decided we were leaving. We moved to another part of the complex first, then eventually to a completely different neighborhood a couple years later. I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Years later, when I was in my early 30s, I got a job at a warehouse doing early morning and overnight shifts. One day during a break, I stepped outside and started looking around, and something felt familiar. The layout, the buildings, the train tracks nearby. Then I saw it. The same apartment complex. I hadn't realized I was working that close to it. It felt like my body just locked up. All those memories came back at once. The scream, the stabbing, everything. I remember just standing there, staring at it, thinking there's no way. I tried to shake it off, but ever since that day, something felt off about working there, especially at night. Eventually, I started taking overnight shifts because the extra pay was too good to pass up. The problem was, The backside of the building was almost completely dark. No proper lighting, just empty space leading to old train tracks where people would hang around at night. Every time I was out there, I had this constant feeling that someone was watching me. Then one night, it finally happened. It was sometime around late spring, maybe May or June of 2022. I was outside loading delivery trucks. Everything was normal at first. I got to the third truck and started filling it with gas. That usually takes a few minutes, so I was just standing there, looking up at the sky, trying to relax. That's when I heard it. 2 loud pops. I didn't even need to think about it. I knew what it was. Gunshots. My heart instantly started racing. I dropped down, trying to figure out where it came from, but I couldn't see anything. It was just darkness. I had to make a decision fast. Stay where I was, or run. The problem was, I was standing right next to a truck with an open gas tank. If a stray bullet hit it, that could have been it. The nearest door back into the building was maybe 40 feet away. It didn't feel far, but in that moment, it felt like a mile. I shut off the gas as fast as I could and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran straight for the door, thinking about my fiance and my daughter, hoping I'd make it inside. I got in, slammed the door behind me, and just stood there trying to breathe. I waited, expecting someone to come through that door. No one did. I told my manager what happened and we called the police. They showed up, searched the area, but didn't find anything. I thought maybe that was the end of it. The next day, my manager told me the police came back and found 2 bullet casings right near the front entrance, about 50 feet from where I'd been standing. That's what still bothers me. Those shots weren't random. They were close enough that whoever fired them knew someone was there. To this day, I still think about it. I don't know if I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or if someone had been watching me. Either way, I left that job not long after, and as far as I'm concerned, that entire area is just wrong. Some places don't change, and some things don't stay in the past.
Back to the end of summer 2019, I, female, needed a distraction from my boring university revisions, and as lots of bored single people, I was on Tinder. Nothing serious. I was too busy to meet guys anyway, but I like talking to people. One day I matched with a dude. We'll name him Ted. Get the reference? Okay, maybe not. He was at the same university as me. He also looked handsome in the pictures. After talking for a few days on the app, and after I had wrongly decided that he was not a criminal, oh, the irony, by the way, I gave him my number. Again, we talked for a while, then he asked to call me. Nothing exciting, just getting to know each other. We talked on the phone for a couple of weeks, and he called me at random hours of the day and almost every night. I didn't think much of it. During our phone calls, he mostly talked about him, but I did not mind because I don't really like talking about myself. It takes time before I trust anybody. And again, I was bored and honestly a bit lonely. I had been single for a while, so getting the attention felt nice. After a few weeks, Ted asked if I wanted to meet. I said yes because I was done with my exams. We met at the city center. When I saw him, I was kind of shocked because he looked nothing like the handsome guy in his pictures. It was definitely him, but good angles in Photoshop truly make miracles. I was set back, but I'm not one to judge by the look, so I went on with the date anyway. Thinking back now, there were more red flags. He was asking odd questions, such as, "Are you shy? Why don't you look at me in the eyes?" Well, buddy, constant eye contact is just kind of weird, and I do need to take my eyes off you to pick up my beer from the table, or light up a cigarette every once in a while. The night went on, and we had quite a few drinks. Usually I would never ask somebody I just met to come home with me, but I was wearing beer goggles that made my brain blind. We left and spent the night together. In the morning, I drove him to the train station and went back home to have a nap. At the end of the day, he called me and asked if we could meet again the next night. I was not really sure if I wanted to do that because I knew that the only reason I had brought him home was alcohol. We did not really click, but the idea of rejecting him made me feel guilty, so I agreed anyway. The day after that, he came to my place again, and there things got weird. I started to feel extremely nervous. Something felt really off. Thinking back, it was probably my guts telling me to run away from this dude. I decided to make things clear, and I told him that I was not looking for a serious relationship at all. It was a lie. I apologized and decided to bring him home. We got in the car and he was quite angry. He didn't want to talk to me and I was embarrassed, so I didn't talk either. When we arrived, he got out and slammed the car door. I know that I have made quite a few mistakes here. I shouldn't have accepted another date with him knowing I was not into him, and I should have told him sooner that I didn't want a relationship. I sincerely did not mean to act badly. That is why I tried to be honest with him as soon as I could. The next day, I called him and apologized again. He said it was fine and he hung up. I thought it was over, but man, it was not. A few days later, it was time to go back to university. That morning, I woke up to a gigantic message from him, telling me that the reaction I had a few nights before really threw him off and that he was looking for stability. As soon as I opened the text, he called me. It was 7 in the morning. I had just woken up, so I can't really remember what he said. But I told him again that I did not want to go any further with him. He hung up again. For the next few weeks, things were extremely weird. He was following me everywhere on campus and very obviously hiding behind walls to hear my conversations, texting me all day even if I wasn't replying, calling me 7 to 10 times a day. I thought he was creepy, but maybe he was just hurt and was coping. Ted was always with a guy. We'll call him Elliot. When I was at the library, they were always sitting together near to where I was. Ted was always watching me as I was studying. When I went outside for break, he followed me. It came to a point where my friends were texting me to warn me that he was behind me. I tried avoiding him, but it was useless. I told him many times that I did not want any more contact with him and that he was making me uncomfortable, but nothing worked. He just kept on going. I was going crazy. 2 weeks later, I was at a party when I met my boyfriend. I fell in love very quickly. He's the most caring and loving man I'd ever met. I know it's all lovey-dovey. Try not to puke on your keyboard. Anyway, at that moment, I knew I needed to stop being so accepting of Ted's behavior. I explained to him one last time that he needed to stop contacting me, and I finally blocked him. Again, I thought and hoped it was over. Ted continued to follow me everywhere on campus for weeks, except he was never with Elliot anymore. One day I was studying at the library. Ted was a few tables away from me, of course. Suddenly, somebody sat at the table in front of mine. It was Elliot. I looked at Ted. He was staring at Elliot with the most murderous gaze ever. I thought it was really weird. I had never talked to Elliot before and he never came near me at all. I was creeped out because I thought maybe Ted had sent him to talk to me. But he ignored me. Kept on studying when I went out for a cigarette, and Ted did not follow me. I was surprised but thought nothing of it. Went back inside to study. A few moments later, Ted went outside. Elliot turned his head. Watched him until he was out of sight, then turned to me. He said, "I really need to talk to you. I think you're in danger." I'm sorry, I know it's weird because we don't know each other, but I'm worried. For both of us, actually. I was stunned. I couldn't talk. He said, "We don't have a lot of time before Ted comes back. When you went out, he came yelling at me because I sat in front of you. When he leaves, can we please talk?" I said yes. At around 6 p.m., Ted left. We waited another hour to make sure he was actually gone. We didn't want him to know we were in contact. At 7 p.m., we sat in the cafeteria and Elliot told me things that would still make me shiver to this day. He explained that Ted had really horrible discourses about women and how he would love to control them. He also explained that a few weeks prior he had suspicions about Ted's behavior regarding university classes. He followed random classes every week, sometimes showed up to Elliot's classes although he didn't follow them, and he did not have access to the university online platforms. Elliot thus realized that Ted did not have a university email address, which every member of university is supposed to have. Elliot went to the university administration and they confirmed what he thought. Ted was not a student and he never was. After that, Elliot completely cut off contact with him. Since then, Ted was harassing him, calling and texting him all the time, following him on campus. Elliot was shaking as he was telling me this story. I was shaken up as well, but was only coming, revealed to be even worse. Elliot explained that he absolutely wanted to warn me because Ted had said terrifying things about me. I already wanted to cry. Ted was talking about me all the time. Before Elliot cut contact, it got to the point where Ted was saying that he would love to molest me, that he knew where I lived, and he could come whenever he wanted and surprise me. Knowing where I parked my car on campus, he could wait for me in the dark. He always said it with a joking tone, but Elliot got freaked out. He and I were shaking. I had tears in my eyes. I knew Ted was a creep, but I could never imagine it was that bad. At this point, we were near the end of semester, but we still had a few weeks left. Elliot and I decided to take action because we didn't want to be terrified every time we were on campus. First, we contacted university security. Things were taken extremely seriously. One morning when I arrived, the walls were completely covered with posters with the campus emergency number. Elliot and I were in constant contact with the chief of security, who was very concerned for the student's safety. Finally, they managed to catch Ted at the library and asked him not to come again. We also went to the police. I don't know the right term for it, but we did not file a complaint. The police only added a note to the person's record so that if anything ever happens to you, the police know what you were worried in the first place about. The police officer seemed worried as well. I asked him why. He told me that he was not allowed to say anything specific, but that if I ever saw Ted outside of campus, I needed to call the police without hesitation. How reassuring is that? I was nearly peeing my pants. A few days later, I get a voicemail from Elliot. He's completely shaken up and tells me that he knows things that he was not supposed to know. Apparently, Ted is mentally sick. He is regularly arrested and locked in mental hospitals. He is a drug addict, an alcoholic, and has violent tendencies. He was already accused of attempted rape. He lives off of invalidity insurance, which explains why he has so much time on his hands to come to university. I would have never guessed when I met him. Later, I contacted one of my acquaintances who works in the police. They were not supposed to, but they confirmed everything. Chills down my spine. After that, things calmed down. Ted was still coming on campus. Don't ask me how or why, but he kept a low profile. He was not following us anymore. It was finally the end of the semester. I went away for a few weeks and I never set a foot on campus. I felt relieved. When spring semester started, Ted was still there. Not following, but watching closely. I was freaked out all over again, but then COVID hit. Since then, all of our courses have been online. I have not yet seen Ted. I don't know if he's still creeping on people or if he is now officially a student. When I think of him, I'm still shaky. I just hope to never run into him again. The obligatory long-time lurker, first-time poster. I want to tell my story of abduction in Krakow, Poland. This happened in 2012, and there are not many people I've told this story to. For my birthday in 2012, my ex-husband and I visited Krakow for a short break. My main interest was to visit Auschwitz and the Jewish quarter of the city and Schindler's factory, which is now a museum. We arrived just prior to the Christmas market's opening. I remember being disappointed that we wouldn't be able to experience this. We stayed in a very nice hotel. I won't divulge the name, but it was approximately 15 minutes walking distance from the main square and cloth market. It had a beautiful balcony over the river and was very nice with lovely, hospitable staff. I couldn't recommend this hotel highly enough. We flew in on a cheap budget flight around mid-afternoon and showered, changed, and got ready to explore. The weather was cold and dreary, with some light drizzle, but more than okay to walk along the river in the Krakow's main city. Krakow is an exceptionally beautiful city. I loved it. We had a good look at the cloth market, ate a meal of matzo balls and stew in the main square under blankets and heated lights, watched the famous clock tower, and even managed to visit the lovely shopping center with excellent shops, where I purchased a lovely cashmere coat from Zara and an equally lovely hat and scarf. Given it's our first night, we had a few drinks, which turned into a few more. We ended up our evening in a lovely bar beneath the city. Most bars appear to be underground in the catacombs. I was overjoyed as a smoker. We are usually social lepers, but we could still smoke cigarettes in this bar. Around 1 a.m., we were tired and decided to head home to our comfy hotel. We made our way up the stairs from the bar to street level, and a taxi ramp was right outside. We jumped in a taxi and let the driver know our hotel location. Unfortunately, the driver would only accept cash, so we explained we would need a cash point at some time along the 5-minute journey to the hotel. He seemed to understand and was fine with this. At this point, I need to explain I had no mobile phone with me. It was back at our hotel. In those days, roaming had to be paid for, so we decided we would only take my ex-husband's phone. It was 2012, so I think I only had an old iPhone 3S, and it was due for renewal. The 5-minute journey was uneventful, and we arrived opposite our hotel, which was a type of dual carriageway with a petrol station, with cash points opposite the hotel entrance. My ex-husband signaled to the driver to pull in to use the cash point and got out of the taxi. As he was at the cash point, this is where my nightmare began. As soon as dropping him off and seeing he was withdrawing the money at the cash point, the driver locked all the doors and sped off. I was in the back seat with several shopping bags and had no idea what was happening. The taxi driver took the main dual carriageway out of the city and kept on speeding. Initially, I thought he was looking for a place to turn around to pick up my ex-husband, but that wasn't the case. The taxi driver continued to speed until we were well out of the city limits. He spoke no English. I asked him if he wanted money. I showed him my empty bag and shopping bags and asked him what was going on. At this point, I was scared, but assumed there was a misunderstanding. Once the driver continued past the Krakow outskirts, I was terrified. The outskirts are very rural, no street lights, just black snow and ice. The taxi driver shouted and shouted at me, but I couldn't understand a word. Eventually, he pushed me physically and forcefully with my head into the back seat and told me, I can only assume, to shut up. He was then talking on his phone to a man. The journey carried for another 20 minutes until we came to what looked like an industrial estate. No houses and some street lights, but the whole area was just warehouses and factories and fields. The taxi driver was still on his phone, sounding angry, then abruptly turned it off and stopped the car. By this point, I was petrified. I can honestly say I've never been so scared in my life. I was praying and begging that my life wouldn't end here at 34, the mother of 5-year-old twins, and ending up dead in a lockup on an industrial estate as some sort of mutilated rape victim. For about 30 seconds, it was quiet apart from my crying and begging. Then the taxi driver got out, came around to the back car door, grabbed me, and threw me onto the side of the road. He then grabbed my shopping bag and hurled it at me, got in the taxi, and drove off. The relief never came, as I was sure he was going to get other men to harm me. I gathered myself up. It was probably -8, late November, and snowing heavily, and I looked for some kind of doorway hedge, or any kind of shelter, bearing in mind that I was left on the outside of an industrial estate. I walked some meters away and found a gap in a hedge and sat down, pulled my coat and bags around me and cried my heart out. I have no idea how long I was there, maybe an hour, maybe 2, but the sky started to lighten and a few cars and vans came past me. I tried to flag some down, but it was no good. I sat back down. I was frozen. I can honestly say I think I was dying and I had no more energy left. All I know from then to my rescue is thanks to some lovely Polish people. Apparently at around 5 a.m., I was sprawled across the road, hard shouldered, and a brother and sister going to market with their cattle stopped and picked me up, dragged me in their truck, and put a big cow poo stained jacket around me. I couldn't speak apparently. I was just trying to talk to my children, and they found out my hotel location from a napkin in my bag. These wonderful people drove me 20 miles back to Krakow to my hotel, where my ex-husband, police, hotel owner, manager, and Polish equivalent of CID were all there in the process of setting up a command center. They dropped me off, still wearing the poo-stained jacket, were questioned, and went back on their way to the market. I never even got their names. I was swabbed, photographed, fingerprinted, etc., and got a stiff brandy from the bar. The following day we visited Auschwitz, the main reason for the Krakow trip. That evening we were taken by the police to the taxi rank where we got the taxi from to try and identify the driver, but he wasn't there. It was left with the Polish police. But man, I must have had somebody looking after me that night. I'm 25 now. When this happened, I was 14, female, doing online schooling at home. I still had to take certain tests as the high school down the road from me. I lived with my mom and stepdad in the northeastern part of Ohio. This time came when I had to take a state test. And that morning, my mom dropped me off at the high school. The night before this, I had made arrangements with my real dad to pick me up around noon, when the test would be over, but I told him if I was not right outside, then just come to my mom's house because I must have finished early and walked home. I finished early around 11 a.m. and decided I would walk home. At the time, I had a relationship with somebody who lived out of state, and we would each buy phone cards to call long distance. It was my turn to buy one, and there was a dollar store on my way home that had cards for cheap. The store I was going to was in a plaza where it was the last remaining business left. The route to my house was all main roads, no side streets. I reached the plaza and have to walk down a hill and past several stores that have gone out of business. I see a man, tall, thin, and wearing a camouflage jacket and a beanie, fidgeting with the small flag in an old planter in front of one of the empty stores. I thought it was weird but just kept my head down and approached him to pass by. When I went to walk past, he stopped fidgeting with the flag and looked directly at me. The man didn't say a word, so I just went back to looking at the ground, and at this point the dollar store was only a few more doors down, so I kind of started walking faster. I then hear really loud stomping behind me and I turn to look around, and of course he is following. So then I am basically jogging to the store. I was scared, but some part of me said he is not really following me and is probably just going to the only store open in the plaza as well. Once I am in the store, I keep looking for him while I head to where the long distance phone cards are. Now I am just standing there pretending to get what I need, yet I am basically scanning my surroundings. I see him now. He is behind a display looking at me. I decided to walk around the store to see if he would follow. He did. I grabbed my phone card and went to the register. He was behind a display still watching me, and I don't know why, but I felt stupid for saying anything to the cashier. I talked myself into saying something once it was my turn in line. I told the cashier that I think the man is following me and I don't know what to do. She looks back to who I'm pointing at. He is now looking at a book and says, "I don't think he is, People wait for the bus here all the time, and it is probably your imagination. I felt stupid, paranoid, and uneasy. I just stood there with her looking at me. I really didn't want to leave the store. Finally, after 3 minutes of getting looked at like I was insane, I left. Once I am out of the store, I start walking fast through the rest of the plaza. I feel relieved that he was not behind me anymore following. In a couple more steps, I hear the bell on the dollar store's door. I turn around and it's him. I start running. Keep looking back and he is still walking. I finally get to the other end of the plaza and to the road leading to my house. I look back again and he is now running full speed. I have to cross and follow the road to get home, so I run across the street when I see no cars, and I am just running as fast as I can run. It is a busy road. I thought somebody would notice this man chasing me and stop to help. He was on the opposite side, still just a bit behind me. A lot of cars are passing by and no one helps. I am focused on making it home. I did have some luck that day. My house key was never on a keychain, just a single key thrown into a large messenger bag stuffed with junk. I luckily found the key as soon as I stuck my hand into the bag. Normally, it would take me some time to locate it. I was running really fast and the bag was bouncing against my side, so the odds of that working out as well as it did were very rare. I now see my house and I'm not looking back. I run up the stairs to the back door, open it with my key, slam it shut and lock the thing. I then went to hide. I thought there was a possibility he didn't see what house I went into. As I am hiding behind the recliner, I hear footsteps coming up the back stairs and then I hear tapping. I am hysterical at this point, not even thinking straight at all. I look around the corner to see him standing at the back door. I see him standing there tapping, and then all of a sudden he starts pounding against the glass pretty hard. I was frozen just looking, and then he presses his face against the glass and starts repeating it in the sweetest voice. "I can see you. I can see you." I was crying and telling him to leave. The only phone we had was one with a cord in the kitchen right beside the door his face was pressed against. I didn't want to move from where I was. I was thinking maybe I should run through the front door and then thought he would catch me before I made it somewhere else. All of a sudden he runs down the steps and I can't see him, and I think he's leaving. I was so happy, but as soon as that thought crosses my mind, I hear something coming from the basement. The first few times I heard it, I didn't realize that he was kicking in the basement window. So what happened next was fast. I projectile vomited across the room and lay on the floor. Yeah, not the best reaction. I then lie on the floor and give up. I feel doomed. As I'm lying there screaming, I hear beating on the door again and I look up to see my dad. It took me a few moments to realize it was him. I ran to the door, still screaming, and opened it to my dad saying, "What the heck is happening right now? I just chased a guy off kicking in the basement window." I just grabbed him and he grabbed me, and I didn't move for a few minutes until my dad made a call to the police and to my mom who was at work. I filed a report with the cops who came out and got a description of the man. They did mention that there was someone who fit the description, whom they were already looking for but wouldn't tell us why. Never heard anything back from them anyway. Maybe 6 months later, I fell asleep on the couch downstairs. When I am awake in the same spot, I see through the kitchen to the back door, which has a light on outside, on the porch. I wake up every couple of minutes thinking I'm dreaming to something. I don't know what. When I finally open my eyes all the way, I see the guy tapping on my back door. Same eyes looking right at me. I hauled ass up the steps, ran into my mom and stepdad's room, and jumped on top of them both while they were asleep to get him. He was gone by the time I realized what was happening and went down there. After all of this, my sister was visiting and up late on the computer downstairs and saw somebody looking in the window who fit the guy's description. Several times after that, somebody tried to bust open our windows, which my mom eventually screwed permanently closed. After a while, we moved. I've never seen him again, and now I live 500 miles from that place. I have a lot of problems from this still. I won't go anywhere alone, unless it is to work. I know I need to get over it, but it is hard. I thought being 14 I was too old for anyone to kidnap, and it was also during the middle of the day in a busy area. I assumed I was safe. I lie to my family now to make it sound like I could go out here doing exciting things, and the truth is, I don't really leave the house unless I am with my friends or boyfriend.
My cousin Danny was the outdoorsy one, always had been. So when he suggested we do a backyard camp out at my aunt's place the summer I turned 11, it made sense that he'd be the one running the whole thing. His older sister Maya had done it with her friends the year before, and Danny had been talking about doing his own version ever since. I was just happy to be included. My aunt's backyard was one of those old, deep lots that backed up against a tree line. Not a full forest, Just a thick stretch of oaks and brush separating her property from the neighborhood behind it. It felt bigger at night. It always did. We set up the tent ourselves, which took longer than it should have. Danny's dad got the fire going around 8. His parents stayed out for maybe an hour, had a couple of beers in the lawn chairs, then went inside when the mosquitoes got bad. Before leaving, his dad told us to knock on the back door if we needed anything. We said we would. That was probably around 9:30, which means by the time things started getting strange, we'd already been out there alone for a while. The first thing I noticed was the fire. Maybe an hour after Danny's parents went in, I looked up from my Game Boy and realized it had gotten bigger. Not dramatically, but we hadn't added any wood. We'd actually let it die down since we were planning on sleeping soon. I pointed it out to Danny, and he shrugged and said maybe an ember caught. I figured he was probably right. We started talking about this kid at school who supposedly gotten caught shoplifting. Regular summer night stuff. I wasn't thinking about the fire anymore. About 20 minutes later, I noticed a smell, sweeter than wood smoke, almost like a cigarette. Danny smelled it too. We looked around and didn't see anything. He said it was probably drifting from a neighbor's yard. That made sense to me. But something about that smell made me feel like we weren't alone anymore. Danny fell asleep before me. He always could just close his eyes and be out. I lay there listening to the fire pop. At some point I heard footsteps in the grass. Not an animal. Animals stop and start. These were steady. I held still until they finally stopped somewhere behind the tent, near the tree line. I told myself it was Danny's dad checking on us, but the back porch light never came on. When I unzipped the tent slightly and looked toward the house, all the windows were dark. I zipped back up and lay there a long time. The footsteps didn't return. Eventually I convinced myself I'd half imagined it. That strange place between almost asleep and fully awake where sounds get warped. I've talked myself out of a lot of things in my life. That night I was getting good practice. I'm not sure what woke me, but when I opened my eyes, the tent was brighter than it should have been. Orange. The fire had been dying when we fell asleep, but now it was fully going again, throwing light across the whole side of the tent. I leaned toward the mesh panel and pressed my face close enough to see through it. Someone was sitting in one of the lawn chairs by the fire, facing the tent, completely still, shoulders ahead, hands resting on the knees. Not Danny's dad. The build was wrong, and this person was leaning forward in a way his dad never sat. I woke Danny. He looked, went quiet, then said it was probably just shadows playing off the chair back. Maybe. The fire does strange things. I decided to believe him because I had to. We lay back down, but neither of us spoke. The sleeping bags felt thin. The tent felt thin. I was staring up at the mesh vent when Danny whispered, "Do you think we should get my dad?" I said yeah. We both knew we should have done it 10 minutes ago. Danny started to sit up to unzip the tent. That's when it happened. The tent wall to my left pushed inward sharply. I turned my head, and before I could process what I was seeing, a hand punched straight through the mesh panel and grabbed my ankle. Not through the zipper, through the mesh itself. The grip was immediate and crushing, large adult fingers wrapping all the way around. I felt myself being pulled before I could even react. The sleeping bag peeled off as I slid across the tent floor. I grabbed at the ground sheet, but it just bunched under my fingers. Danny was screaming my name, and it sounded like it was coming from another room. The tent peg on that side ripped out, and the whole wall caved inward as I was dragged through the gap and out into the grass. The cold hit me first, then the smell. That same sweet, wrong smell from earlier. Except now it was everywhere, right on top of me. I was on my back, moving fast, the grass cold and wet against my neck and arms, the tree line coming toward me. I dug my free heel into the ground and it did nothing. I clawed at the grass with both hands. I was screaming. I know I was, because my throat hurt for 2 days after. I couldn't see him. He was behind me, dragging me by one ankle. And every time I twisted to look, I caught nothing but darkness in the shape of legs moving quickly. We were maybe 10 feet from the tree line. The back porch light exploded on. Danny's dad's voice cut through the dark, loud and sharp. Then the back door slammed hard. The grip on my ankle loosened slightly, just for a second. I felt the hesitation in it. Then the shot, the loudest sound I've ever heard. A single blast fired upward, not aimed at anything, just a sound that meant the next one might be. Birds burst out of the tree line. Every neighbor's light came on at once. The hand let go. Footsteps crashed into the bushes and disappeared. Danny's dad crossed the yard at a run, and I just lay there in the wet grass, staring up at the sky, completely unable to move. He grabbed my shoulders, and I remember his hands were shaking. The police came. Flashlights swept the tree line for a long time. They didn't find anyone. The thing I keep coming back to is the smell. That sweet, strange smell had been there for hours before anything happened, which means he was already there, already that close, long before either of us noticed. He was patient. Whatever he was planning, he was willing to wait all night for it. I don't know what would have happened if Danny's dad hadn't come out when he did. I still think about the charcoal smell sometimes, not in a nostalgic way. It started the way most stupid decisions do, with Craigslist. I was helping my buddy Marcus get his new place set up after his divorce, and he needed basically everything. Furniture, kitchenware, whatever. He didn't have the energy to shop around, so I volunteered to spend a Saturday morning scrolling through listings in his area. That's how I found the Weber kettle grill for $40. The photos were decent, slightly ashy, clearly used, but solid. The seller had a few other things posted, a shop vac, some patio furniture, so it seemed like a normal person offloading normal stuff. I messaged him, and he got back to me within maybe 10 minutes. Short answers. Friendly enough. Said his name was Derek and that I could come by that afternoon if I wanted. I said sure. He sent me an address. I almost didn't notice anything off when I pulled up. The house was in one of those subdivisions where everything looks identical. Same beige siding, same 2-car garage, same little ornamental tree by the mailbox. I parked along the curb. The driveway was empty. I texted Derek that I was out front and waited. Nothing came back. I figured he was in the backyard, which honestly made sense if he was trying to sell a grill. So I walked up the driveway and called out a hello. No answer. Around the corner of the house, there was a wooden gate that was already open. Just slightly. Not wide open. Ajar. Like someone had meant to close it and didn't quite finish. I pushed it and stepped into the backyard. The yard was bigger than I expected. Long and narrow, with a wooden fence on both sides and a tree line at the far end. The grill was right there in the middle of the patio, exactly like in the photos. And there was a folding chair next to it with a half-finished drink sitting on the armrest. Condensation on the glass, still fresh. I stood there for a second, called out again. Nothing. I walked toward the grill to look it over. I crouched down, checked the bottom vent, lifted the lid. Everything fine. That's when I noticed the sliding glass door at the back of the house. It was open about a foot. Not wide, just open, with the screen door pulled across. I could see the kitchen inside, and it was dark, but I had the distinct feeling, the specific, hair-raising feeling, that something in that darkness was looking back at me. I straightened up and pulled out my phone to call Derek instead of text. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. His voicemail greeting was generic. One of those automated ones with just the number read back, which is nothing I know. Plenty of other people don't set up their voicemail. but standing in a stranger's backyard with a half-warmed drink and an open door, it landed differently. I decided to wait by the gate. That's when I noticed the fence. Along the left side of the yard, there were gaps between the fence boards. Old wood, warped from weather, totally normal. But as I was walking back toward the gate, I caught movement in my peripheral. I stopped and looked directly at the fence. The gaps were dark. I couldn't see anything. I stood there for probably 15 seconds, staring, feeling genuinely foolish. Before I convinced myself it was a dog in the neighbor's yard, or a kid, or literally anything. I got back to the gate and leaned against the house, scrolling my phone, trying Derek again. Voicemail. I typed out a text. "Hey, I'm in the backyard. Take your time." Sent. The red receipt came up immediately. I stared at that for a second. He read it immediately. Didn't respond. Didn't come outside. Just read it. I sent a follow-up. Should I come back later? Same thing. Read within seconds. Nothing back. I'm not proud of how long I stood there rationalizing that. Maybe he was in the bathroom. Maybe he was on a call and just glancing at notifications. I probably would have kept standing there too. Except I looked back at the sliding screen door and noticed it had opened wider. Not all the way. Maybe another foot. I hadn't heard it move. I hadn't heard anything. It was just more open than before. I left. I didn't jog or make it obvious. Just walked at a very deliberate, controlled pace back to the front of the house and got in my car. As I was pulling away from the curb, I glanced up at the second floor. There was a window above the garage, and the curtain moved. Not like wind, more like it had been held aside and then released. I drove to the end of the block and sat there for a few minutes just thinking. On my way home, I passed a woman walking a dog on the sidewalk about 2 streets over. I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled over and rolled down the window and asked if she knew the house on Fielding Court, the beige one near the end. She looked at me a little sideways and said she thought it had been vacant for a few months, that a family had moved out in the spring. I didn't go to the police. I thought about it, but what would I even say? The curtain moved? I had no proof of anything. I still checked Craigslist for the listing when I got home, but it was already gone. What I keep coming back to isn't the screen door or the curtain, or even whoever was watching through those fence boards. It's the red receipts. Somebody in that house was holding a phone, watching me stand in that backyard, and just waiting, letting me think I was alone while they decided what came next. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know how many of them were in there. Marcus ended up getting a grill from Home Depot. I drove him there myself. My cousin Ryan and I were house-sitting for my aunt and uncle the summer before I started college. They were in Italy for 3 weeks, so it was just the two of us in their house out in Murraysville. Big house, big yard, quiet neighborhood. Nothing about that situation should have been a problem. Ryan and I had been there one day when I walked into the garage and found the side door, the one that leads out to the backyard, sitting slightly open. Not wide open, just unlatched, resting maybe an inch away from the frame. I figured one of us had gone out and not pulled it fully shut. I closed it and didn't think about it again. That was probably the first thing I should have paid more attention to. A few days passed without anything strange. Ryan and I had a routine going. We'd watch TV, make food, hang out by the pool. On some occasions, Ryan would have his Bluetooth speaker out by the pool blasting music while we floated around. It's safe to say we were having a great time. Then on the 4th or 5th night, I was lying in bed around midnight, and I heard that garage side door open. It has a specific creak to it, a low groan that rises in pitch as it swings. I had walked in and out of it probably a dozen times already. I knew the sound. I lay there waiting to hear Ryan's footsteps, assuming he went out there for some reason. But there were no footsteps. No sound at all after that. I got up and knocked on Ryan's door. He was in bed. He hadn't gone anywhere. We both went down and checked. The door was closed but unlocked. Neither of us had been in the garage since earlier that afternoon, and neither of us had gone down to close it. We looked at each other for a second. Then Ryan reached over and locked it. He said old houses settle, doors shift. It probably hadn't been fully latched to begin with. That's a reasonable explanation. I mostly believed it. I didn't sleep great that night either way. About a week in, Ryan's girlfriend came to visit for a few days. Having a third person around made the house feel more normal. The three of us spent most of a Saturday out by the pool. Late in the afternoon, Ryan and his girlfriend went inside to start making dinner, and I stayed out a little longer by myself. That's when I noticed the chair. My uncle has these wooden Adirondack chairs arranged around the fire pit in the corner of the yard near the fence. There are 4 of them, always in the same positions. I looked at them probably every day, but that afternoon, one of them was pulled forward, out of the arrangement, facing the pool, directly facing the pool. The ground under it had that flat, compressed look like it had been sitting that way for a while, not like someone had just moved it. I went inside and asked Ryan if he or his girlfriend had moved a chair. They both said no. I went back out and moved it back into place and didn't say anything else about it. But I kept thinking about it through dinner. That chair was not in that position the day before. I was certain of it. Ryan's girlfriend left a day early without giving a full explanation. That night it was just Ryan and me again. Around 9 p.m., I noticed the garage side door wasn't fully latched. I pushed it shut. An hour later I walked by and it was open again. The same amount, just resting slightly ajar about half an inch. Ryan said the latch was probably worn. That was a reasonable explanation. I accepted it. I went to bed that night with my bedroom door closed. I don't normally sleep with it closed, but that night I just wanted it shut. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. to a low scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. I lay still for a second, trying to make sense of it, then got up and moved to the window. Down in the backyard, one of my uncle's Adirondack chairs was being dragged slowly across the yard. A man was pulling it, positioning it deliberately in front of the pool, facing the house, and in the pool itself, lit up faintly by the underwater lights. Another man was swimming slow, calm laps like he had nowhere to be. I just stared for a second. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Then I pushed the window open and shouted down at them, "Hey, who are you guys?" That was a mistake. Both of them stopped at exactly the same time. The swimmer turned and looked up toward my window. The man with the chair straightened up slowly. Neither of them said anything. Then the man by the chair reached down and picked something up off the ground near the pool edge. I couldn't make out exactly what it was, but the way he held it at his side told me enough. The swimmer climbed out without rushing. They looked at each other once, then both started walking toward the house. Not running, walking, direct and unhurried, like they had already thought through what came next. I pulled back from the window and grabbed my phone. My hands weren't steady. I called 911 and told the operator there were 2 men in the backyard and that they were approaching the house. She told me to stay on the line and that units were on the way. I screamed down from the window that the police were coming. They didn't stop, didn't even slow down. I heard the back door take the first impact, then the second, then the frame gave. Their footsteps came through the kitchen, steady and unhurried, and then hit the stairs. I had my back against the far wall. I could hear them in the hallway, both of them. Then my door handle moved. It moved again, harder. Then I heard the distinct sound of metal being worked at. They were going after the handle itself, trying to knock it loose from the door. Then Ryan's voice came from down the hall, shaky but loud. "I've got a shotgun and the cops are already on their way. Get out of this house." And then the sound. a pump action racking. Unmistakable. Then another. The kind of sound that doesn't leave any room for interpretation. Everything stopped. 3 seconds of silence. Then I heard footsteps, fast this time, moving away from my door, back down the hall, down the stairs, and now through the back of the house. The rear door swung and slammed. Then nothing. The police arrived about 4 minutes later. They cleared the house and found the broken back door, the damaged handle on my bedroom door, and wet footprints through the kitchen and up the stairs. 2 sets. When they were gone, I found Ryan sitting on the edge of his bed. I asked him where he got a shotgun. He looked up and held his Bluetooth speaker. He'd pulled a pump-action sound effect on YouTube the moment he heard them on the stairs and blasted it at full volume through the hallway. That was it. That was all it was. I've thought about that night a lot since then. I think about the 2 men walking toward the house without hesitating even after I told them the cops were coming. And I think about how close everything was to going a completely different way. If Ryan hadn't been quick, if he hadn't thought of that speaker, if he'd hesitated even 30 seconds longer, I don't let myself finish that thought.
That weekend was supposed to be a simple anniversary trip. Jenna and I left after work, heading to a bed and breakfast about 2 hours north that Jenna had found online. We booked it 2 months ago, and we were looking forward to make the most of our time together. The drive alone was relaxing without the usual distractions until we exited the highway. The GPS took us onto a country route that got narrower with each mile. Around mile marker 17, the GPS started acting up. It kept recalculating as the blue line jumped all over the screen. Jenna checked her phone and found we had 1 bar of service that kept dropping to nothing. I pulled onto the shoulder near what looked like an old farm access road. The engine idled while I tried to make sense of the paper map we grabbed at the last gas station. Jenna leaned over. Her finger traced the route we thought we were on. We were bickering about the possible right direction when suddenly headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. I popped my head out to notice a dark van crawling past. The driver took it as some signal and pulled over right beside us. The passenger window of the van rolled down. 2 men sat inside. Both looked in their 40s. The driver kept his hands on the wheel. The passenger leaned toward us with a friendly smile. He said they were locals, and he asked if we were lost and needed help with directions. I told him we were trying to find the Pinewood Inn, that our GPS had quit working. He nodded as if he understood completely. Said the area was notorious for bad signals. The driver said something I couldn't quite hear, and they both laughed. The passenger said they knew exactly where we needed to go, and that there was a shortcut just up ahead. We had to turn left on the Millbrook Road, and it would cut 15 minutes off our drive easily. He gestured vaguely into the darkness ahead of us. Jenna squeezed my hand, unsure, but the guys really seemed to know their way around here, and any help seemed better than getting lost. I thanked them. The passenger gave us a little salute, and they pulled ahead slowly. We waited a moment, then followed. The turn from Millbrook Road came up faster than I expected. I didn't spot any street sign, but there was indeed a gap in the trees with cracked pavement barely visible in our headlights. I made the turn. The van had already disappeared down the road ahead of us anyway. Within a quarter mile, I knew something was wrong. The pavement gave way to gravel, followed by dirt with deep ruts. The trees crowded in so close that the branches scraped against the passenger side. There were houses or lights as far as we could see, but the forest was getting thicker. Jenna said we should turn around, and that she was getting heebie-jeebies. I agreed, and started looking for a place wide enough to turn. That's when I checked the mirror and saw headlights behind us. The van had circled back and was keeping about 50 yards back, matching our speed exactly. My mouth went dry. I sped up slightly, but so did they. The road ahead curves sharply to the right. Just past the curve, it widened enough for me to attempt a 3-point turn. I pulled forward and started to cut the wheel. The van accelerated. It came up fast. It stopped at an angle that blocked the road behind us. Both doors opened at the same time as the 2 men stepped out. The driver had something in his hand that caught the light. It was a tire iron. Jenna whispered for me to go. I threw the car into reverse, trying to back up and go around them. The passenger moved faster than I expected, coming straight for my window. He was yelling something about disrespect, about how we shouldn't have ignored them after they'd helped us. The driver swung the tire iron against the truck. The metal made Jenna scream. I jerked the car to the right. My wheels span in the dirt. We lurched forward into the trees, branches exploding across the windshield. The passenger had to jump back. I straightened out and floored it, fishtailing down the road we'd come. In the mirror, both men were running back to the van. We flew down that road, suspension bottoming out in every rut. I didn't slow down until we hit pavement again. I kept going, past Millbrook Road and the spot where we had pulled over. I didn't stop until we reached the gas station with lights and people. My hands wouldn't stop shaking when I tried to pump gas. Jenna called 911 from inside. The sheriff's deputy met us there 20 minutes later. He took our statement and said he'd send a car to check Millbrook Road. He asked what the van looked like, what the men were wearing. I realized I couldn't remember much beyond the tire iron and the passenger's face when he ran at us. The deputy told us that Millbrook Road was a dead end and that it hadn't been used in years except by hunters. Said if we'd gone another half mile, we would have hit a locked gate with nowhere to turn around. We never made it to the bed and breakfast. We were too shaken and drained. We drove back home, took back roads the whole way, and didn't talk much. I recently had to drive that route for a client meeting again, but I made sure I covered the distance in broad daylight. Still, when I passed that curve, it felt like I was reliving a horror I barely escaped. I booked the Airbnb 3 days before I needed it. I just quit my job without another one lined up, and my girlfriend had moved out the week before. I needed to get away from my apartment, the city, and everything. The listing was cheap. It was merely $40 a night for a whole house in rural Pennsylvania. The photo showed a 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. The reviews were sparse, mostly one-liners like "interesting place" and "definitely unique." One review simply recommended to follow the rules. I arrived after dark on a Thursday. The house sat at the end of a dirt road with no other homes visible in any direction. The key was in a lockbox by the front door, exactly where the host said it would be. Inside, the house felt wrong immediately. The layout didn't make sense. Doorways led to rooms that felt too small or too large for their purpose. The kitchen had 2 sinks but no dishwasher. The living room had built-in benches along the one wall with leather straps bolted to them. I found the house manual on the kitchen counter. Most of it was standard stuff about the Wi-Fi password and trash day. But the last rule was printed in bold. It said the basement door must remain locked at all times. Do not attempt to open it under any circumstances. I looked for an explanation, but there wasn't any. The basement door was in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room. It had 3 deadbolts and a padlock. I tested the handle out of curiosity. It was solid and didn't budge. That first night, I fell asleep around midnight on the couch. The bedroom upstairs had the same leather straps on the bed frame, and I couldn't bring myself to sleep there. I woke up around 3 to a scraping sound underneath me. It was like someone dragging something heavy across concrete. I sat up and listened. After a minute, it stopped. I told myself it was pipes or maybe an animal that gotten into a crawl space. Old houses make noise. The second night I was up, sitting in the kitchen with a coffee, working on job applications I had no motivation to finish. When around 3, the lights flickered before they went out totally. I turned on my phone flashlight and went to check the breaker box in the hallway. Suddenly, a low humming echoed from the floor below. It sounded like a woman's voice. I pressed my ear against the floor to listen better. The humming stopped. A second later, 3 loud jabs were hurled exactly where my ear was. I sat right up, and the lights came back on. I reasoned that the week of sleepless nights after the breakup, coupled with the constant anxiety of being unemployed, had finally started to mess with my senses, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I drove into town for breakfast. The diner was nearly empty. I sat at the counter, and the bartender who doubled as the cook asked if I was just passing through. The second I mentioned I was staying at the farmhouse on Richter Road, his expression changed. He asked how long I was planning to stay. He said most people didn't make it past 2 nights there. I asked what he meant. He leaned in closer. He said the house used to be a part of a private treatment facility back in the 60s, the kind of place families sent relatives they didn't want to deal with. It burned down in 1967, killing 8 patients. The main house survived, but they sealed off the basement where the treatment rooms had been. He said not everyone made it out during the fire. The official count was 8 dead, but the facility had admitted 11 patients that year. 3 were never accounted for. I asked if he was serious. He just shrugged and said the house had been through 6 different owners in the last decade, and none of them stayed long. I drove back and checked the listing again. The host's profile indeed looked concealed, and the account had been created 2 months ago. I started packing, telling myself I'd leave in the morning and take the financial hit on the unused nights. Maybe I could crash on one of my friends' couches for a week or so. I had walked into the kitchen to grab my charger when a sharp, nasty odor filled the air. It smelled like disinfectant mixed with rot. I followed it to the pantry. The back wall looked slightly different from the surrounding wood. I pushed back on it, and a section swung inward. Behind it was another door. This one was old with a simple handle. The smell was stronger here, seeping through the gaps in the frame. It reminded me of hospitals and funeral homes. I twisted the knob. Behind the wood, the stairs led down into darkness. I could hear fabric rustling down there, along with soft padding of bare feet on concrete. I closed the door and backed away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. That night, I stayed in the car with the engine running and the doors locked. Around 3, I saw a light come on in the upstairs window. I squinted to find the front door open. A thin woman stood in the doorway, wearing a faded hospital robe. From the car, I couldn't make out her face, but I could see she was looking directly at me. She grinned and mouthed at me to go away before she turned and went back inside, slamming the door shut. My body started trembling like a leaf. I didn't wait for dawn to creep in and drove in the dead of night without looking back. I reported it to Airbnb, but the listing was gone by the time I checked later. The host's account had been deleted. 2 weeks ago, I got a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of the farmhouse taken at night. The front door was open, and in the doorway, barely visible, was the same thin figure. The text below it said, "You left before checkout. You still owe 2 nights." It was our first trip without our parents, so Luna and I had been low-key buzzing. Her aunt had offered us a cabin in the Catskills for a long weekend. We were 15 and eager to prove we could handle 3 days on our own. But somehow Cassie found out about it and cornered me after gym class 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave. Her eyes were red and puffy. She said her ex-boyfriend Tyler had admitted he only dated her to get close to me, and that he told half the school that I was the reason they broke up. She begged to come with us, saying she needed to get away from everything. Luna pulled me aside and warned me to be careful. She claimed Cassie gave her the creeps, and asked whether I'd noticed the way she stared at people when she thought they weren't looking, but I felt guilty. Tyler had asked me out twice before he started dating Cassie, and I said no both times. Maybe if I'd been clearer with him, none of this would have happened. I told Cassie she can come. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by pine trees. It was smaller than I imagined, with only 2 bedrooms separated by a thin wall, a kitchen, and a living room with a wood stove. The nearest neighbor was a mile down the mountain. Luna claimed the 1 bedroom immediately, so I ended up sharing the other with Cassie. The first night felt tense. Luna made dinner while Cassie sat at the kitchen table, picking at her cuticles and watching us move around. The cabin didn't have cell service or TV, except for an old radio that only picked up static, so we decided to call it early. An hour past midnight, I jolted up to Luna screaming my name. I shot out of bed and ran to her room. She was pressed against the headboard, pointing at the doorway, said she'd woken up to someone standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her in the dark. When she screamed, they backed into the hallway. She whispered to me to check on Cassie. We did and found the girl sitting on the edge of my bed, wearing the same clothes from dinner. Her eyes looked blank and unfocused. She asked what was wrong and said she'd been in the bathroom when she heard Luna scream and she was about to come. I told Luna that maybe she was just too exhausted and hallucinating. Cassie agreed immediately and laid back down. The next morning, Luna had gotten over it and wanted to explore the area. As I was getting ready, I realized I couldn't find my necklace. It was a thin silver chain my grandmother had given me before she died. I always kept it on the nightstand when I slept. I searched everywhere and even asked Luna to help me look, but we couldn't find it. By afternoon, other things started disappearing too. Luna's sweatshirt was missing. My favorite pen, chapstick, goggles, and my phone charger were also gone. That night, I was up reading an ebook on my Kindle under the duvet when around 2, I heard whispering coming from Cassie's side of the room. It was so quiet I thought I'd imagined it at first, but I could hear my name being repeated over and over, mixed with words I couldn't quite make out. I kept my eyes closed and didn't want to move until the whispering stopped. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was afraid the girl would hear it. As the morning rolled in, I waited until Cassie stepped out for air and searched her bag. Unsurprisingly, it had all the missing items, including my silver necklace wrapped in tissue at the bottom. There were other petty things too, like scrunchies and a pair of my underwear I hadn't even realized were missing. Underneath everything, I found a spiral notebook filled with school notes and doodles in the margins. But when I flipped through the pages, what I saw made me sick. The entire notebook was filled with crude, detailed sketches of me sleeping, walking, or getting into Luna's mom's car while Cassie watched from a distance. Each drawing was dated, going back months. Further in, the drawings got worse. In one, my eyes were scratched out. In another, I was lying on the ground with the dark scribbles around my head while Cassie sat on a throne, looking happy and pretty. The last page had writing instead of drawing. It was messy, with some words crossed out and rewritten. It said Tyler had never wanted me, that I'd stolen him, and that if I were gone, everything would go back to the way it was supposed to be. My hands shook as I tried to process what I'd just seen. Suddenly, a loud shriek echoed from outside, followed by footsteps. Luna was calling for help. I dropped the book and ran to find Cassie coming through, holding one of the kitchen knives. I grabbed Luna's wrists and bolted to her bedroom as Cassie came at us, screaming that I'd ruined her life. She said Tyler would have loved her if I hadn't been around, that everyone would have been happy if I were gone. She pounded on the door and scraped on the surface with the knife while Luna and I tried to keep the door closed. We were sobbing and screaming, trying to figure out any way to get help and escape the situation. Luck might have been on our side, because a neighbor from down the mountain happened to be driving by, heard us, and pulled into our driveway before Cassie could get to us. He called out to understand what was happening, which might have scared Cassie because she dropped the knife and ran into the woods before the neighbor could reach her. He called the police and told them everything. They found Cassie 2 hours later, sitting by a creek with mud all over her clothes. She didn't resist when they took her away. She kept muttering that I'd stolen something that belonged to her. Luna's mom picked us up that afternoon. I found out later that Cassie had been admitted to a psychiatric facility. Her parents apologized to mine, saying they had no idea she was capable of something like that. Tyler transferred schools before winter break. That was 4 years ago. Last week I got a package at my college dorm. It was awfully wrapped and without the sender's details. Inside, I found my grandmother's necklace that the police had kept as evidence. I called the facility where Cassie had been right away. They told me she'd been released about a month ago.